This is apparently a guide to good practice in PD focusing on SMSC, or as I prefer to think of it, is my guide to doing far less as a tutor, because that is something that I like to think I excel at. First, the reasons for sort of this alternative approach, as many of you are aware, some of the students in my tutor group are very hard to engage. The first time we did the SMSC last year, when Phil really introduced it, I think was on the vote of Syria, which is ironic doing this today. Even with my subject specialist knowledge on that, I found, as a whole tutor group, I found it very, very hard to manage that discussion. It was a scene similar to that. Also, a lot of the students in my tutor group, I found, if given the opportunity, and I'm sure many people will sort of empathise with this, will do nothing when given the opportunity. So it was about, so there was sort of a clear need there. I thought this at the end of last year and during the summer as well, and at the beginning of this year, about getting their independence skills up, and that was sort of another focus that came into PD, I think, with sort of the show and tell thing that was introduced at the start of the year. So the thought about was making it more student-led. The key, I think, sort of beforehand, is to be flexible, using different approaches for different issues, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But mainly, always putting the focus on them to lead and them to do the work. So some things that I've done that have worked: possibly print the questions off in advance, so they've got something to just be getting on with, even if that's just as a quick sort of starter thing, just jotting their initial ideas down. It works just for the first few minutes. I then tend to go through the main slides of Phil's presentation that he sends around very, very quickly, just the first sort of 3 or 4, the basic information, some of the pictures, just to get them thinking. Allowing that individual thinking time, which is obviously, I know is an increased focus for many of us in departments around the school as well. I then get them to discuss the main question amongst themselves and write up their soapbox response. This is before we've gone through anything as a whole tutor group, if you like. As they're doing this, I will field questions. Those questions are sort of out loud, so they can sort of bounce the ideas off each other. It's not just them getting on with worksheets and family groups or whatever. And also that allows you to sort of correct if there's any misconceptions or anything, particularly with, say if you think about, I mentioned the Syria vote one earlier. A few of us, although it wasn't an official SMSC, did something on the Paris attacks a couple of weeks ago. So obviously if there are any misconceptions there, they needed to be addressed to the whole group rather than just the individual who was asking that question. Once they've done this, if there is time, if time allows, and if I feel able, then we'll do the whole class discussion for a few minutes. And then really my main contribution is right at the end, where I will pick what I judge to be the best soapbox comment. Ideally it won't be one from a student that I've chosen from before, and I will write up the bubble to hand into Phil, and that's actually my main contribution, is making that choice. I could even give that ownership to a pupil as well, but then that helps me monitor sort of exactly what area the discussion went into, I suppose, what direction the discussion took doing that. I'm not even sure if I'm officially allowed to say this, but sometimes with sorts of bribery, there's a real merits push at the moment. Celebrations always go down very well, I've found. Meanwhile, whilst they're doing this, I know that there's a real sense amongst all of us as tutors that that there's an awful lot to get done a lot of the time. So I will quite often use this time, whilst they're having their discussions amongst themselves and writing up their soapbox comments, to get things like equipment check jobs done, because then also that allows me to go around and monitor the discussion again. Any notices to give out? What I've done this week is I've used the time whilst they're getting on with things to do some sort of one-to-one feedback with particularly Year 10s and Year 11s about their reports, and obviously the Year 11s with their mock exams as well, which I found worked very well yesterday. And almost giving it like an extension task, like you would do in a normal lesson. Talk about things that are coming up. So, you know, oh, guys, tomorrow we need to start working on Christmas assembly or whatever, so can we be starting to think of ideas for that, please? And then if they get it finished, then they can start, they've got something, you know, there's something tangible going on, so there's no sort of lost time, I find. Some of the different approaches that I use, think about different ways of introducing it. You know, is there a YouTube clip, which is always my first port of call, just in general. So like the Scott Mills Resilience one that Neil sent around, I found worked very well. I know Judith Shakel had some great success when we did the remembrance stuff. She brought in some artefacts that her family had that she said worked very well with her tutor group. And if there's any subject-based material that people have, that can work well, because I think I've found that students like it if you make it relevant to you as well as them. So I talked to my tutor group when we had Henry Shachter, the Holocaust survivor, in last year. Although many of my tutor group went out the talk, I still spoke to them about it, and they really engaged very well with that. And also getting away from it having to be this sort of rigid task all the time. If time, you know, discuss issues that aren't part of an official SMSC, and you know, as I mentioned, a few of us did do a very brief, not very brief. We did spend some time covering the Paris attacks, and this is from a PowerPoint that Jen is responsible for. I can take no credit for. Some of the things I say, just on the side, that I actually don't necessarily refer to it always as SMSC. I start off by sort of saying, guys, we've got a topic for you to consider, or there's another topic for you to consider. You may have seen or heard, I always start off by saying, because it makes it relevant to them, and someone has always seen or heard something about it. They've all, you know, 90% of them have seen the Hunger Games. Many of them knew, they all knew what Remembrance Day was, and that it was the centenary last year. So it makes it relevant to them. And also, you know, whilst they're discussing, guys, please be making sure we're writing something down, because then it takes care of the evidence, and you've got, as well as it's taking care of their SMSC provision and discussion, you've then got the soapbox and the talk bubble evidence as well. And this is now, I'm sorry, I will just be very quick, so I won't run. This is now something I'm looking to sort of also introduce to the show and tell things. So I've designed this worksheet, trying to make it a little bit more like an interview rather than me sorts of shepherding and leading this whole presentation thing, if you like, just one person having to talk at a group of people, even if they're not, you know, especially if they're not particularly confident in it, much like myself over the last 5 minutes.